Hi everyone, so we are going to get started in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for the last few people to sign in. So just give it a couple of minutes and at 10:30 UK time, we'll get going. Okay, we're just going to give it one more minute and then we'll get started. All right, so I think we're at 10:30, so we're going to go ahead and start. So first of all, hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today for this webinar on cross-border prospecting. So it does look like we have a very international audience, so that's really encouraging to see. So today we're going to be looking at how prospecting best practice in 5 key countries, so France, Germany, Italy, the United States, and the United Kingdom. So we did speak with VP sales, CEOs and marketers, get their inside take on what salespeople should know when prospecting in these markets. So the idea today is that you're going to walk away from this webinar with actionable insights that you can use yourself or of course, with your sales team. So to begin, a very quick intro into who we are. My name is Robin Nichols and I work on content marketing at Ecosystem. So Ecosystem is a B2B platform, and basically we help sales reps to book more meetings and essentially sustain through engagement. Now, we're not really going to be talking so much more today about if you're curious, read our website there on the screen, www.icosystem.com. So at ICO, we are to have a very and we realize that business development norms are just not the same across cultural and country lines. And that kind of piqued our curiosity, and we sort of wanted to explore that topic in a bit more depth for the first webinar of the season. So first, of course, a really big thank you to all of our contributors who came to support this webinar. Secondly, you will be receiving the slides and the on-demand version of the webinar we weren't able to cover absolutely everything in 30 minutes, so we did also produce an ebook that will go a bit more detail, and if you'd like to receive that, of course you can. Now, thirdly, and this is really important, there is sometimes a fine line between picking up on cultural differences on the one hand, and on the other hand, overgeneralizing or even stereotyping. So, I want to take the time to say the last thing that we want to do, of course, is to propagate cultural stereotypes or, make sweeping generalizations. So please do keep that in mind as we move forward. Okay, so what you hear on this, see here on the screen is a model from the GlobeSmart platform by Aperion Global, and that's just a professional training and coaching organization. Now, this model is used to compare how people from different countries tend to behave in a business setting. So basically, you can answer your own survey, plot your own line down here, and see if you are more or less independent, egalitarian, risk-oriented, direct in your way of communicating, or task-oriented in a business setting, then people tend to be in other countries, so the US, the UK, Germany, etc. And for our example, of course, in the countries that you're prospecting. So these graphs are based on data collected from GlobeSmart's over 1 million users, international users, a canvas of interviews, as well as input from intercultural experts. So where you fall on that spectrum that we just saw is going to have an effect on how you should pitch, time needed between follow-ups, the length of the sales cycle, who's involved in the decision-making process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all the factors that we're going to look at throughout the rest of this webinar. Okay, so let's take a look first at the country of France. So we have France mapped here on our graph and compared to the other countries we're looking at today. And the first thing you'll sort of notice about France is that they tend to be rather, in a business setting again, status-oriented, more so than Germany or the UK, and much more so than the US, which is over here. And by status-oriented, I mean they tend to be, sensitive to authority in the workplace, really respect hierarchy, etc. Now, Nadia, who is a global account manager herself from Aperion with 11 years of international B2B sales experience, she shared with me some tips on how this sort of status-oriented translates into prospecting the French market. Okay, so first, probably want to err on the side of formality. And especially the older generations, they do tend to appreciate a formal tone and approach. And that means, for example, using the equivalent of dear Mr. or dear Mrs. Instead of just, hi first name. If the person you're prospecting drops to an informal register, that's fine. You can mirror them. And for certain industries, that very well may be the case. But for the first contact, the norm anyway is to You're probably going to want to avoid using overly salesy sounding words like value, great, best, or sort of using a lot of exclamation points. This can come off as a bit sort of heavy-handed for French readers, though, for example, in an American context, it might seem dynamic or even eye-catching. Now, prospectors who use a bottom-up approach might find this strategy a little bit more challenging in status-oriented cultures like France or even Italy, just simply because somebody lower in seniority may feel a little bit uncomfortable talking to their superiors on your behalf. However, if you do want to be a little bit sort of cheeky, you can use the fact that they're status-oriented to your advantage, actually, and put that person's boss in copy of your outreach email. And, precisely because they're a bit more sensitive to authority, this might sort of nudge them to respond to you, maybe more so than average. So, try this one out, see if it produces better results. In terms of dealing with objections, French culture is quite focused on discussion and debate. And that's something that I noticed myself when I moved to France. When a French prospect says no, very often it's not a complete and final no. in the sales process. It's often more of a way of inviting the salesperson to debate with you, challenge you. So, you know, oh. Sorry, so a bit of a technical difficulty there. So I'll get back to where we were. Yes, that basically, when you're prospecting in France, don't be too put off if a French prospect says no. Be ready with a lot of counter arguments, a lot of objection handling, and sort of be used to this sort of way of debating or discussing quite a bit. And this does get us to a very general principle in sales, which is, of course, that you should always listen to your prospect. Now, Chris from Nail That Sale, who's a sales trainer with 25 plus years of experience, working internationally in the IT sector, he outlines just how important it is to give airtime to prospects, and especially, of course, if there's a difference in culture or even in language. Now, France is a very high context culture when it comes to communicating. And by high context, all I mean is that for countries that are over here on this side of the spectrum, good communication is, it's nuanced. Messages are often implied and read between the lines. And this is opposed to low context cultures over here, like say the United States, which is way over here on the left, in which good communication is very precise, very simple, very clear. Things are really taken at face value. And we could also use the words direct over here and indirect over here instead of low or high context. So, when you're prospecting, if you're from a high context culture, like say France, and you're talking to somebody who's from over here, low context or direct, you might want to just cut out some of the context or the lead and the fluff and just really get right to the point. And of course, vice versa. If you're, from a country over here, prospecting somebody from over here, maybe put a bit more context in, do a bit more ice breaking, be a bit more subtle, and of course, listen to what your prospect might be telling you indirectly. Now, just because you know what the norm of a certain culture is, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to follow it. So at ICO, we do like to test outreach email scenarios that actually purposefully go against what you'd normally see on the French market. So here on the screen, you can see it's one of the scenarios that our French sales development reps use. Probably don't read French, but again, this will be in the ebook version of the webinar. But you can even see nonetheless that there are these little sort of grammar quirks, or we use a smiley face every now and again. So it's basically trying to just create an informal tone, more relaxed than you'd normally see. And again, this works for us because, in part, we're a tech company and we reach out to a lot of tech companies. This may or may not be appropriate for your industry. But for us anyway, this particular scenario got quite good results. So a 38% response rate, and almost 13 positive touch rate. And positive touch meaning just, yes, I'd like to have a meeting, I'd like to learn more. So that going to show basically that going against the grain in sales can, actually have quite a positive effect. So Jean-Baptiste from AT Internet also shared some tips relating to timing when prospecting the French market. In France, lunch breaks can go anywhere from noon until 2 p.m. So Jean-Baptiste was saying, try giving somebody a call between 1:30 and 2. This is a time when some French people, they finish lunch, they might be sort of hanging around their desks, but they may not have big meetings yet because those do tend to start right at 2. Friday afternoons can also be good for sort of a similar reason. People are winding down for the weekend. They might feel they've got a bit more time to chat to a salesperson. In big cities like Paris, the workday tends to start a bit later and last a bit longer than if you're in a smaller town or in the country. So calling somebody at maybe 8 p.m., 7:30 to 8, might be a good idea. Again, their day's winding down. They might be a bit more relaxed, but they're still at work. Versus, say, Germany, for example, where people tend by 8 o'clock to be already at home, sort of with their families, switched off from work. France's school vacations do depend actually on the region you're in. They're not national. So just think of doing a quick Google search, seeing if your decision maker might be away for the holidays with their family, depending where they live in France. And similarly, May, the month of May, has quite a few bank holidays, which means it's a fun time to be in the office, but it's not necessarily the most productive for your pipeline. A lot of people take long weekends. So again, just check the calendar and be aware of that when you're forecasting. All right, so let's move on now to the German market. The first thing you're going to notice is that in Germany, communication tends, in a business setting, to be quite direct. Now, for prospectors, that means you're going to want to basically just get right to the point with a prospect, cut out a lot of the small talk and the fluff, stay really data-driven, focus on the ROI, use a lot of case studies early on. Now, who's from Dale Carnegie, put it this way. He said, Germans tend to measure a lot of numbers and KPIs. We come from an engineering and production history, and therefore I recommend to show clear ROIs, of course, during the sales process. Another idea that did come up quite a bit was that the German market is not particularly receptive to cold outreach. Erin, who's from Softshell, and that's a value-added distributor that actually specializes in business development in the DACH region. She did say that with emails, a double opt-in with an easy unsubscribe button is certainly recommended, if not required. The legal regulations are too complex for us to really go into now, but she did recommend checking out this document, The Legal Situation for Email Marketing in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, by the Certified Senders Alliance. All right, so how do marketers and salespeople sort of work with these restrictions? They do have to, get new business somewhere. This is going to sound kind of like a standard best practice for any prospector anywhere. But for Germany, I think that you really do need to be sort of extra rigorous about how, appropriately targeting, really preparing your sales email or call, really reaching out to your prospect at the right time. Now, Jean-Baptiste explained, again, that because it is quite easy to get blacklisted with email in the German market, their sales team actually sets their marketing automation thresholds to be higher for Germany. So basically, only top decision makers get reached out to right at the right time, right as they're interacting with high buyer intent content. Now, Jordi Brazier, who's the Senior Director of Sales Operations at Kubol, he had a good tip. He said, in the markets where cold outreach is a bit more challenging, now for his example, it was the Dutch market, but I think it's quite applicable here as well. He said, think about spending more time building a relationship with the people that have access to the opt-in lists. So, conference or event organizers, for example. It's kind of a good way to work with these outreach restrictions. So most people tend to get into the office in Germany, let's say between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. And calling after 5 p.m. isn't really recommended. The idea also came up a few times that it might not be worth trying to get a hold of somebody after working hours or while they're commuting, which isn't necessarily the case in, say, the United States, for example. And for holidays, again, the 2 weeks around Christmas are usually pretty slow. All right, finally, Germany does have a very linear sense of time. And that just means basically deadlines and punctuality are sort of culturally highly valued. So this is going to sound like a simple one, but basically just sort of be on time, especially if you compare this with, say, France or Italy, which is a bit more to the flexible side in terms of scheduling on this chart over here. Okay, so let's move on now to the Italian market, which in some ways is quite like the French market. They have a sort of shared cultural Latin root. Now, what you're going to notice is that Italy is quite relationship-oriented in business, a lot more so than any of the other countries we're looking at today. And again, what does that sort of mean for salespeople? For big deals, let's say 70K and above, you are sort of expected to take a client out to dinner, sort of build a face-to-face relationship with them. When you're prospecting, okay, check the CRM. Do you have any sort of subjects for small talk? Isn't there an event you can stop by and say hi at? Even just spending 10 minutes on LinkedIn, trying to see if you have common connections so that you can drop a name in an outreach email, put a common connection in copy or in the subject line. All of these things are going to carry more weight and get you further in a relationship-oriented culture over here than it would, say, in a task-oriented one like the US or the UK or even Germany. Remember, if you are using ICO to engage your leads, to send those emails, remember that you do have a window of 1 hour after you engage the lead and before your email is sent to do precisely this. Go into the first email and personalize it a little bit. Now you can also see how interdependent the Italian work culture tends to be. And that really just translates as sort of needing to consult the whole team or group before making a decision. So you may have a slightly longer sales cycle because of this. You might have some more people in your demos than usual. You might want to leave a bit more time between follow-up emails. Now, we're lucky enough to have an Italian account executive with us, Arianna Burra, and she was able to share some of her experience prospecting in Italy. So, as within France, in Italy, it's important to use proper titles. So, if somebody has an advanced degree, use Dr. So-and-so. You're probably going to want to use quite a formal tone for outreach emails, perhaps even more so actually than in France, and certainly more so than in the US or the UK. So here's an adaptation of a prospecting email that we normally send to the UK market, and Arianna translated and adapted it using the tips we just mentioned. And again, most of you probably don't speak Italian, but this is in the ebook version with a translation if you'd like to see that. And basically, she just sort of made it a notch or two more formal than we're used to for the UK market. And this scenario actually had quite good results, 84% open rate, 38% response rate, 9% positive touch rate. And one thing that's sort of interesting to highlight is the subject line, which is very simply meeting request in English. And with such a high open rate, 84%, it sounds really simple, but it clearly worked quite well for us. So could be a good tip for you guys, see if it works as well. In terms of timing, calling it 10 a.m. or around 7 p.m. Was a good idea. Keeping in mind that can be a relatively long lunch break, depending where you are in Italy, anywhere from 12 noon until 3 p.m. In terms of off periods, August is pretty slow. The Christmas holidays tend to last 2 weeks, December 24th, let's say, till January 7th. And there is usually a week off for Easter. All right, so let's go across the Atlantic now to talking about prospecting in the United States. It's much more common to be, let's say, informal and even playful in an American business setting than it would be, let's say, in Western Europe. And we can see just how egalitarian the United States is in business. So it sort of makes sense that you can, be on first name terms, for example, with a big decision maker in the US. And Jordi put it this way, he said, in the US, you can be very conversational, like, hey, I just thought I'd drop you a line. In Germany, the UK, and especially France, it's much more formal. In the US, you can take more liberties, grab someone's attention by being fun or playful. Now, you can see just how direct, or again, low context, the American communicating style is compared to the other countries you've looked at today. And again, this just means that messages are taken at face value. You can basically just get right to the point. And this should actually really affect the way that you pitch. If I quote Jean-Baptiste again, American business culture is very pragmatic and value-minded. It's all about how relevant your message is. If you have a good elevator pitch for the first 10 or 20 seconds, an American will listen to you, no matter where they are, if they're commuting at work or at home. But if you're not clear, nothing will happen. But in Europe, you need to introduce yourself, make small talk, warm people up, and the first 30 seconds are spent doing this. Now, here's a good example of this really kind of direct style of prospecting or communicating. That's a prospecting email that I received myself a while ago from an American company. And if you compare it with the French or the Italian prospecting emails we saw before, this one is polite, but it's very direct. The first line gets right to what the salesperson's after. All the formatting, the bullet points and everything just draws your eye right to the key areas. There's no context or icebreaker or anything. So interesting to sort of make that comparison there. In the US, again, it's generally speaking a little more easier to make a sale over the phone. Again, of course, up until a certain deal size than in Western Europe. And this might be because American business people tend to be risk-oriented, again, more so than Italy or France, where people might need maybe a bit more reassurances. They'd like to talk to existing clients a bit more, be sent more case studies, etc. Another point a little bit particular to the American market is that they're quite independent, but at the same time egalitarian. So this might mean, again, that a bottom-up approach could be a bit sort of more effective here. Now, a lot of people brought up the fact that cold calling and cold emailing is already very common in the US. Ruel, who's the chief commercial officer at Usabilla, and that's a company that helps brands to optimize their websites through live user feedback. He specified that for this reason, he prefers an email sales outreach approach in the US, again, since people just already receive really a lot of cold calls. And he did point out that this means it does take more touches, more attempts to get a hold of a decision maker, anywhere from 8 till 12, let's say, which is a reason why automated email engagement can be quite an attractive solution for markets where there's already a lot of cold outreach. So the last country we want to look at today is the United Kingdom, and we know a lot of our viewers are from the UK, so we won't linger too much on this point. But I did just want to make a quick comparison between the US and the UK. You can see here that the UK looks to be quite similar with the US. Those two lines, the orange and the purple, seem to follow each other pretty closely. But there was sort of a couple instances where there was a bit of difference. Now, New Voice Media did a survey in 2015 where they talked to 908 American and 910 UK employees working in B2B about their experiences with salespeople. And the stats do seem to uphold this idea that the US is a rather demanding market when it comes to outreach. So, over double the respondents in the US and the UK were completely dissatisfied with sales approaches they'd received. 86% of Americans versus 68% of the British said that relevant information during a sales call really makes the difference. So it sort of seems that the Americans, they really appreciate sales reps that basically do their homework, and they're frustrated when they sort of don't remember information that they were already given. And again, interesting for people who are thinking of doing some cold calling or cold emailing in the States, Americans do seem a little more skeptical, a bit less likely to pick up the phone or open an email from someone that they don't know than the British respondents. So again, all of this is just kind of food for thought, when developing your new business strategy for the States. All right, so I think we are pretty much out of time. We really did want to try to stick to 30 minutes. But if you were going to walk away with a couple bullet points from this webinar, I'd say very generally speaking, be prepared to build relationships when prospecting in France and Italy. That means name dropping, icebreakers, finding common ground, etc. Do be aware of the cold calling or cold emailing regulations in Germany. Do your due diligence, be creative and invest in ways of getting hold of opt-in lists. The American market has been exposed already to a lot of cold calling and cold emailing, and their tone tends to be a lot, more fun and informal than can be found, let's say, in Western Europe. Now, another point that came up again and again was that if possible, we didn't mention this before, but it is good to use native speakers when prospecting to foreign countries. It just sort of makes the process more smooth and enjoyable, I guess, for the prospect. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. I hope you will walk away with at least a couple points that you find useful or that you didn't know before. Unfortunately, we're not able to do a live question and answer today. But if you do have any questions or you want to share your own cross-cultural prospecting stories, or even if you have any examples of cross-cultural prospecting that go against what you just saw, that's perfectly fine. You've got my contact details up there, company contact details. And again, you will all be receiving the on-demand version, the slides to the webinar, and the ebook version if you'd like to receive it. So thanks very much for watching today.